Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Guys Gone Bible today. As you can see, I have a brand new poster behind me. And right now, I'm still in the process of turning my living room into my future studio. And I finally had a poster made, and I'm going to get it custom framed and have it over here on the other side above my desk. But anyway, I wanted to welcome to Guys Gone Bible today, a place where we explore, discuss, and teach various passages of the Bible and how we can learn to apply it to our lives. So whether you're a longtime believer like me, just starting out, or somewhere in between, I am glad to have you. And I know I'd said this last time, but I can't say we, my co host and I can't say we yet because it's just me again today. So I'm still praying for a co host, and I'm still praying that God will show me the right person in the right time. So whoever that person is going to be, I know that it's definitely going to be somebody very special. So and somebody that is going to have a lot of value to offer and a lot of things to share that are on their heart. And I would even say this is probably somebody that God has had off to the side and has been working on this person for maybe quite some time. So, but again, like I said, it's just me today, and feel free to sit back and relax, get something to eat or drink. Now, because today is Mother's Day, by the way, I tried filming this a little bit ago in my car, and I was having way too many sound quality issues, so I wasn't able to do it in my car. So I'm basically back in the studio again, like normal. And actually, the funny thing is, I've noticed there's kind of the last couple episodes I've done by myself, I noticed that there's kind of been like a trend, where I start trying to film in my car and then something happens or something doesn't work out and I end up just back in my regular studio. So maybe that's a sign. I don't know, but we'll see how it goes. Maybe I will try to film in my living room now that I got my poster behind me. And but we'll see what happens moving forward. So today's food suggestion, because it's Mother's Day, it's actually going to be a good one this time, I promise. And you're probably thinking like, oh yeah, here we go. Yeah, right. He's going to say something stupid or silly again. No, really. It's a good food suggestion this time. A green bean casserole with tater tots. And I like to say tater tots because that's actually the way my mom makes a green bean casserole. She makes it with tater tots with, I think, some ground beef and a little bit of, I think, mushroom soup. And then she cooks it in this special container and puts it in the oven. Anyway, it tastes great. You could probably make it with French fries too. But anyway, I told you it was going to be a good food suggestion. So if you're a mom or you're cooking for somebody, or if you're going out, whatever you're doing, that's today's food suggestion. So by the time you guys watch this, Mother's Day will already be passed. But on the day I'm recording this, it's Mother's Day. So I'm just going to say that's today's food suggestion anyway. So, but today we are going to talk about the topic of surrender and surrendering to God and what it looks like when we surrender all of our plans, all of our ideas, our anxieties, our depression, all of our whatever it is for you. And it's unique for each person. And today I want to talk about something that is both simple and difficult at the same time, and that is the idea of surrender and surrendering our plans, our anxieties, fears, dreams, and so on. And ultimately surrendering our entire lives to God. Because the truth is, most of us love the idea of trusting in God until our trust requires surrender. But many times we want control, and surrender means releasing that control into the hands of God. The problem is that surrender feels uncomfortable to the flesh because surrender requires faith. It requires believing that God knows better than we do. It requires trusting God even when we cannot see the outcome. Proverbs 3:5-6 talks about trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight. Notice that it says, do not lean on your own understanding. Why? Because our understanding is limited. Because God sees the beginning and the end. God sees what we cannot see, what doors we need to close, what relationships we need to end, what seasons are necessary for growth, what battles are protecting us from future destruction. And many times, surrender is not God taking something from us. God is protecting us, redirecting us, or preparing us. Sometimes we hold on to things God is asking us to release, and we wonder why we have no peace at times. But peace comes after surrender. The reason why many people are exhausted spiritually is because they are carrying things God never asked them to carry. These are things like anxiety, fear, pressure, control, worry about tomorrow, and so on. 1 Peter 5:7 talks about casting all our anxiety on him because he cares for you. Not some anxiety, but all anxiety. God never intended us to carry the weight of life alone, and yet many believers still pray while still holding on to control. We may say things like, God, I trust you, but then we spend all night worrying. We may say things like, God, have your way, but we have become frustrated when his way looks different than ours. True surrender says, Lord, even if your answer is different than what I wanted, I still trust you. And this is what real faith looks like. And throughout the Bible, we see powerful examples of people who surrendered themselves fully to God. One of the greatest examples is Abraham. God told Abraham to leave his country, his comfort zone, and everything that was familiar to him. There was no detailed roadmap. There was no 5-year plan. There was no explanation of every step or anything like that. All it was just obedience, and Abraham ultimately surrendered to that. And when we take a look at Genesis 12, we see that Abraham went as the Lord told him. And that right there is faith. Faith is all about obeying before you have all the details. Later, Abraham faced another imaginable test. God asked Abraham to surrender Isaac, the very promise God had given him. And Abraham obeyed. Abraham obeyed because Abraham trusted the character of God. He believed that if God made a promise, then somehow God would remain faithful. And sure enough, he did. Many times, surrender is tested most deeply in the areas we treasure the most. This could look like in areas of our relationships, our future, desires, children, ministry, dreams. I mean, you name it. Whatever it is for you, we need to be able to say, God, your will above my own. And that is one of the most difficult things to do. Surrender always leads into a deeper intimacy with God. Another powerful example is Moses. Moses did not feel qualified. When God called him to lead Israel, Moses responded with insecurity and excuses. And many times, that's what we do. We see that Moses couldn't speak well. We also see that Moses also doubted himself. But eventually, Moses surrendered his limitations to God. And God used an imperfect man to accomplish an extraordinary thing. Some people listening today may feel unqualified, even myself as well. Some people listening today may feel unqualified. You may feel inadequate or weak or not good enough. But the good news is that surrender is not about your ability. It's all about God's ability through you. God is not looking for perfect people. God oftentimes is looking for surrendered people, because a surrendered heart gives God room to move. Another incredible example is Hannah. Hannah desperately wanted a child, and in deep anguish, she prayed before the Lord. First Samuel talks about how Hannah poured out her soul before God. She surrendered her pain, her disappointment, her grief, her longing, and all of that stuff. And during prayer, Hannah made a surrender to God. She said that if God would give her a son, she would dedicate him back to the Lord. And this is how we had the prophet Samuel. So that right there is surrender. Not just wanting God's blessing, but being willing to release the blessing back to God. Sometimes surrender happens in prayer, not surface level prayer, but honest prayer. The kind of prayer where pride breaks or where tears fall, the kind of prayer where we stop pretending to be strong. Because prayer requires honesty before God. God cannot heal what we continue to hide. Another example is when we take a look at King David. David was a warrior and a king, but David also understood surrender. Throughout the Psalms, we see David consistently bringing his fears and anxieties and emotions before God. In Psalm 55:22, David says, "Cast your burden on the Lord, and he will sustain you." David understood something very important, that surrender is not weakness, but rather surrender is dependence on God. And some of us struggle with surrender because we think dependence is weakness, but that's not it at all. And some of us struggle to surrender because we think dependence is weakness, but oftentimes dependence on God is strength. Jesus himself modeled surrender perfectly. In the Garden of Gethsemane before the cross, Jesus prayed one of the most powerful prayers in all of Scripture. In Luke 22:42, Jesus prayed, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me. Nonetheless, not my will, but yours be done." If we think about that for a moment, Jesus knew what kind of suffering was ahead. He knew the pain, the betrayal, and ultimately the cross. And yet he surrendered fully to the Father. He ultimately said, "Not my will, but yours be done." And that right there is a prayer of surrender. And honestly, that prayer is not always easy because sometimes God's will stretches us. Sometimes God's will requires patience and requires letting go. And also sometimes God's will leads us through uncomfortable seasons. But God's will is always higher. Isaiah 55:8-9 says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, and neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord." God sees beyond this moment, and many times what feels like a delay is actually divine protection. What feels like rejection may actually be protection. And what feels like loss may actually become transformation. But surrender requires trust. One of the greatest enemies of surrender is anxiety, and anxiety always wants control. Anxiety always wants certainty and immediate answers. But faith says, even when I do not understand, I trust God. Philippians 4:6-7 says, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, present your request to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus." In this passage, we notice something very important here, that peace comes after surrendering our burdens to God. And many times people want peace without surrender. But peace is often found in releasing things into God's hands. Some people are mentally exhausted because they are trying to control outcomes that belong to God. And you cannot control everything. The irony here is that a person was never in control to begin with. You cannot force every door to open. You can't make everyone understand you. But one of the things that we can do is that we can trust God. And surrender says, God, I am releasing this situation into your hands. And this often includes things like family, future, career, health, finances, fears. I mean, you name it. Whatever it is for you, bring those things before God, because surrender does not necessarily mean giving up. Surrender means giving over, and that's the distinction there.
Welcome to this edition of Another Time. For today's episode,
That was very nice.
That sounded wet.
thank you for watching this edition of Another Time. Goodbye.
Another power example of surrender is Mary. When the angel told Mary she would give birth to Jesus, her life changed forever. This assignment must have been overwhelming for her because the cost was great. People could misunderstand her and judge her and also reject her. And in this instance, Mary responded in surrender. Luke chapter 1 says, "Behold the maidservant of the Lord. Let it be to me according to your word." And when we follow Mary's example, this is just the sort of thing that we need to do in our own unique situations. And through surrender, God brought forth purpose. Sometimes surrender unlocks purpose. Sometimes we cannot step into what God has for us because our hands are too full of holding on to our own plans. And surrender often involves letting go of idols. And I'm not talking about physical idols. I'm talking more along the lines of idols of things like control, approval, success, comfort, self-reliance. Basically, an idol is anything we place above obedience to God can be an idol. And Jesus said something in Matthew 16:24 that's very important. Whoever wants to become my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily to follow me. And that right there is a perfect verse that describes what I'm talking about. It requires denying self, choosing obedience, and following Christ daily. And surrender is not a one-time event, but a daily practice. Every day we have to choose surrender over and over, and every day we have to choose trust in God and putting our worries before God again and again, because the flesh always wants control. But surrender keeps our hearts aligned with God. And there may be someone listening right now who may be fighting God internally. I know that I can say for my own personal life, I too also struggle with this. And if you're also listening to this right now, you know that God has been speaking to you about this as well. Maybe He has been calling you to let go of something. Maybe He has been asking you to forgive someone. Maybe He has been calling you into deeper prayer or asking you to trust Him about your future. But unfortunately, if you're like me, fear has a way of holding you back. But I can encourage you with the fact that God is trustworthy, and not only that, God is actually completely trustworthy. The same God who carried Abraham, Moses, Hannah, David, and Mary, and a whole host of other people just like them. The same God who strengthened Jesus in Gethsemane is the same God that will strengthen you right now. And the great news is that you don't have to carry everything alone. Jesus says in Matthew 11:28, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." And this rest comes through surrender. It doesn't come through control. It doesn't come through striving or trying to cope with your situation or pretending that you have it all together. And today, maybe the greatest prayer you can pray is something that looks like, "Lord, I surrender, not partially, but completely. Lord, I surrender all of my plans, all of my fears, all of my ideas, my timelines. Whatever it is that it looks for you, surrender that to God. Give it to God in prayer and see what happens. Because when you look back to the examples that we talked about earlier, it is oftentimes through surrender great things happened as a result. And ultimately, we are surrendering to the one who knows us best, the one who also loves us the most, and the one who holds our very future. And even when surrender feels painful, it always leads to something greater in God's hands. And when we think about it, we actually do want God's plans above our own. But that requires faith to do that. Romans 12:1 talks about offering our bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. So every time you surrender, that right there is your worship. Not only that, but every act of obedience, every moment trust is worship. Every time we choose God's will over our own. So today, let us become a people who surrender daily and fully to God. A people who not only trust God completely, but honestly, and people who say, Lord, have your way in my life. So that's all the time we have today. I'm not going to make this video very long again. I actually don't have a not sponsored ad this time. But I would say that if you guys have an idea of a funny not sponsor you would like for me to write a script about, go feel free to comment that below. I definitely have a lot of fun writing those. And just like the name implies, these are not sponsors. These are not people that are actually endorsing this video. So it's just more of a funny way for me to let my creative writing side come out a little bit more. Also, if you guys have any topics you would like for me to talk about, also feel free to comment those below. And the last thing I wanted to mention is that if you didn't watch our last episode, I talked about how if you have any dreams that you would like for me to interpret for you, feel free to comment below. And if you comment within 5 to 7 days of each video, and there's not too many thousands of people comment with, there won't be. These videos, I mean, at the time I'm recording this, these videos are not really getting a lot of views. So if you comment and you want me to interpret your dream for you, there's a pretty good chance I'll be able to get around for you. So if you would like for me to interpret your dream, go ahead and comment that below. So I'll just go ahead and leave you with that. I want to close this video out with Numbers 6:24-26. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord let his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift his countenance towards you and give you peace.